Market Prospects, delivering timely information and education to prairie farmers for over 30 years. Market Prospects is brought to you by the University of Saskatchewan's Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics and these sponsors. Log on to marketprospects.usask.ca to view past programs and for information on upcoming programs.
It's time again for our Market Prospects interview, and this week we focus on the durum and malting barley situation and outlook. And once again, we're pleased to have Ward Weisensel, the Senior Vice President for Trading, Procurement and Risk with G3 Canada, as our guest. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here again, Bob.
Right off the top then, let's start with the durum situation. What is the current situation in durum markets, and what are your expectations for price movement for the rest of the crop year?
Yeah, so last week I talked about the wheat situation and just the overall arching situation. That is a lot of stocks in the world, record-ending stocks, and durum trades in relation to that. Well, durum can trade somewhat independently of that because there's a core of the customer base that's that they need to have durum regardless of the price. So when you look at the durum situation in the context of the broader context, basically we produced a very large crop this year, about 7.8 million tons, so up from 5.9 million tons last year. The challenge this year was we produced a very, very poor quality crop, a lot of fusarium issues and vomitoxin issues with the crop through this growing season period. And in fact, over 50% of the crop was graded a 4 or worse. So a lot of that grain, very high levels of vomitoxin, is not going to be suitable for the export market. And in fact, only 19% was in the top 2 grades, which compares to a long-term average of about 60%. So it gives you a flavor for how difficult it was. So when you look at the overall situation, there's going to be less durum wheat available to be exported from Western Canada, because in order to hit the export market, you have to hit a vomitoxin spec of 2 parts per million or less, and a lot of the crop is well above that, and that's just a reality. When you look at our total export program, we're about 500,000 tons behind last year, still on target to hit the overall export number, which most people expect, which is around 4.6 million tons, which would leave us with a carryout of around 3 million tons, which is up a lot from the previous year, but a lot of that durum is very poor quality and is going to have to be blended out over a number of years, assuming we get better quality crops to blend that with.
Okay, so give us your acreage production and price projections for durum for the new crop year then.
When you look at new crop budgets, durum actually still works out reasonably well relative to others. It's not one of the highest, but it's better than a lot of them. But the difficulty, because of the experience with fusarium and vomitoxin, and the fact that the durum varieties are not very resistant to that disease, we're expecting farmers to move out of durum in a fairly significant way from an agronomic perspective. And we're seeing people saying acreage reductions of anywhere from 15 to 30%. That's going to result in a drop of production. Instead of 7.8 million tons this last year, moving down to about 5.3 million tons. And we're hoping that's going to be a better quality crop. In terms of our price ideas, our most likely scenario, assuming normal weather, a consistent Canadian dollar, we're expecting to be in that $6.50 to $7 per bushel range. We do see more upside with durum than downside, because if there's any type of hiccup, because that inelastic demand, it tends to have a fairly significant price impact. Right now, when you look at the world, there aren't any really problem areas. Rainfall has been pretty good right across the durum area around the Mediterranean Sea, but the next couple of months are pretty critical in that regard.
Dealing with malting barley, then what's the situation with quality and quantity with that, and what do you see for movement and price over the rest of the current crop year then?
Well, barley and malting barley is operating in a coarse grain complex that has record-ending stocks. So overall coarse grains are somewhat depressed. In terms of malting barley itself, it suffered from some of the same quality issues that the other crops did, although we did find good pockets and better than expected pockets of quality, particularly in Alberta. Saskatchewan was not as good, but in Alberta it was better. And as a result, we've seen sort of a gradual decline in prices through the year as people get more comfortable with the quality that is there. And in terms of movement, if you have good quality barley, it's going to move well. If it's high in vomitoxin, that's going to be much more of an issue. It's going to have to find feed channels, and that's a different marketplace.
Expectations for 2017, 2018 malting barley, where do you see that then going?
Yeah, so we're expecting barley production to drop a bit in Western Canada this year. So coming off of 8.4 million tons, maybe down to 7.6, 7.8. And so, but the one thing that's really hurting the situation this year is Australia has produced an all-time record crop of barley. That is our major competitor in the export market as it relates to malting barley. And that crop's going to carry them through the summer and even into the fall next year. So that causes some concerns from a pricing perspective. When we look at our projections, again, assuming normal weather and a steady Canadian dollar, we're showing numbers in the $4.25 to $5 per bushel range. There's upside and downside around that, depending on what happens, not just here. Europe and others are critical as well. But the Australian situation is a concern overall, without question.
All right. There's a lot of competition out there with crops. Where do you see major cereal crops fitting in with the crop rotations in the coming years then?
Well, there's no question in North America, so it's not just a Canadian phenomenon, but in North America, there has been a decline of cereal acreage, particularly wheat, barley, much lesser extent corn. And that's a function of the fact that over time, the Corn Belt is moving north. So we're seeing more corn produced in Western Canada. We're seeing more soybeans produced in Western Canada. The varieties are getting better adapted, and that is pushing those acreages down. And it doesn't seem to be hurting prices that much, because even though those trends are there, I just said the last 4 years we produced record riddle wheat crops. So wheat is going to have to find its profitability level with other crops from a relative pricing and return perspective. But clearly, looking right now, oilseeds and pulses look better than where cereals do at the present time.
It's an interesting year ahead. Thank you very much for coming in on Farmgate here again. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here, Bob.
Okay, we break again. We're back in 2 minutes. Please stay with us.